Good afternoon and welcome to The Appeal Live, a co-production of Now This and The Appeal. I'm Emily Galvin Almanza. So the California District Attorneys Association, or the CDAA, is a lobbying organization composed of elected prosecutors in California. It has a long history of opposing reform, especially reforms to the criminal legal system, including efforts of reform-minded prosecutors to do things like reduce the length of or number of criminal sentences that they hand out. So now the CDAA is supporting controversial litigation filed by deputy prosecutors in Los Angeles County against newly elected Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon. The deputy prosecutors, these are deputy prosecutors within Gascon's own office, say that Gascon's new reforms, which are promises he ran on and presented to voters and on which he won the election, these promises, which include ending three strikes laws and sentencing enhancements, that they illegally stop these deputy DAs from doing their jobs. Now, Gascon says he is simply fulfilling his campaign promises to end sentencing enhancements, three strikes laws, through the discretion that prosecutors are already afforded by virtue of their office. The Los Angeles Times recently published an editorial agreeing with Gascon, saying, and I'll quote, "The whole reason the people elect DAs is to allow them to exercise their judgment about how best to apply limited resources of time, money, and prison space, and how to best seek justice. If voters don't like the way a DA uses that discretion, they can elect a replacement." So, unfortunately, this isn't the only reason that the CDAA is in the news right now. It's not every day that a, random prosecutor lobbying organization is in the news twice for two different reasons, but the CDAA actually regularly joins litigation and spends resources advancing its organizational interests. But as with any nonprofit that relies in part on financial donations, funders are allowed to earmark their donations for specific causes. So, for example, a person can donate to the CDAA and say, hey, I want you to use this money fighting against polluters who commit environmental crimes. And they're supposed to use that person's donation for the thing the person asked for. It's an earmark. Now the CDAA is under fire after an audit found that it misspent $3 million, in fact, earmarked for environmental enforcement matters. And instead, they spent that money on their own lobbying and training. So for more on the scandals surrounding the CDAA and what they signify for the future of California's criminal legal system, we're now joined by Megan Cassidy, a reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, who wrote a story about this audit, by The Appeal's senior legal analyst, Kate Chatfield, and of course by Cristine DeBerry, executive director of the Prosecutors Alliance of California, which Gascon and several other elected prosecutors formed last year as a counterpart to the CDAA. So thank you all so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Welcome. When you talk, we can all hear you. So Megan, what are the top takeaways from that story you wrote in the Chronicle? What does this audit reveal about where these millions of dollars meant to protect people against environmental crimes actually went?
Sure. And it's actually important to note that right now it stands at $2.8 million that's missing from this environmental fund, but this has been going on for 14, 17 years. That the organization CDAA would borrow this money that was usually coming from these big ticket lawsuits. So, you're suing Exxon Oil for, not handling the oil properly or polluting the environment, and then getting these multi-million-dollar lawsuits. CDAA gets a cut of that because they have joined forces. Their prosecutors have all helped lead this prosecution. And then what's supposed to happen is that it goes back into this environmental fund and to spend that on more environmental training groups for prosecutors, learning the California laws, or especially for smaller counties, it was really important because it could fund a specialized prosecutor that could work on these cases when maybe the smaller counties wouldn't be able to.
Interesting. So, okay, Kate, can you take a step back and tell us for a second about why the CDAA and this audit are so important. Like, what's the ramifications? What's their influence level?
So first, I just want to, so the CDAA is this professional association. There are 58 counties in California. The CDAA is, the professional association for each of those elected district attorneys in each county. So they have a lot of power from their office, right? These are the power in the Capitol with legislation and other, power with individual legislators. So for them, I want to just talk about the way you described that, the earmarks for this spending scandal. These are more than just normal earmarks. These are the results of court settlements. So courts are giving the CDAA money to do this specific thing. This is a fraud on the court by taking this money and using it, putting it in their general fund and using it for lobbying purposes. The other source of funding that they have taken is California state taxpayer funds. They've written grants to get money from the California Environmental Protection Agency to prosecute these crimes. That's the money that they're taking from the courts and from California taxpayers, and they're using it to lobby against criminal justice reforms that voters want. So this is really, I just want to sort of amplify the scandalous nature of this. And these are not just normal people. These are powerful lawyers. The number one reason for discipline and disbarment at the California State Bar is taking client trust fund money, co-mingling funds. These are educated, powerful attorneys that are doing this. This is a big deal.
Oh my God. I never have as much faith in lawyers as I probably should, being one. But having a judge tell you, go take this $2 million and use it to protect families against toxic pollution, and having them instead use it to fight to keep people in cages for longer. You're right. I mean, it's really hard to overstate what a shocker that is. Cristine, you have long been critical of the CDAA, and I'm wondering, looking back at their history, does this level of misconduct surprise you, or does it seem on par with what you've seen before?
I've had disagreement with CDAA's approach for years, as you mentioned, largely focused around the positions they've taken on criminal justice reform issues and an unwillingness to think about modernizing their approach and abandoning tough on crime policies. I honestly did not anticipate that the organization would also be involved in this kind of misappropriation of funds. It was a surprise to me that they, in their role of a member organization representing elected prosecutors, have, as Kate mentioned, violated the settlement agreements that were reached in important environmental cases. It's not something I anticipated was happening. I assumed that the budgeted items they use for lobbying and other activities were appropriately allocated, and we're now learning that the environmental funds, as well as many other taxpayer funds, seem to be funding parts of the organization and their lobbying efforts that speak directly against the values of Californians, as they've expressed repeatedly in ballot measures and district attorney elections and a range of other reform opportunities. So it's surprising that a member organization of prosecutors would be involved in misappropriating $3 million.
Yeah, mentioning the will of the voters, I think, is a really interesting angle here, because, we mentioned at the top that Gascon ran on the policies that his line deputies are now suing to stop now, and voters voted for them. And I'm wondering, prosecutors tend to be elected. I believe they're exclusively elected in California. And other elected officials must be looking at the credibility of the prosecutors in this lobbying organization right now and making some decisions based on these allegations. So, Kate, do you think this is going to affect how elected officials perceive the CDAA and their support of certain policies? Will it impact their credibility?
I definitely think it will impact their credibility. I want to just say the CDAA in Sacramento already has a credibility issue. I mean, when you're constantly standing against reform, I mean, for every little and big reform, when they're taking a hard line no stance, you tend to stop listening to them as a legislator. It's just because they're always standing against necessary reform. So I think, but showing that these people can't even mind their own house is very significant. I also think what it reveals, and I'm just going to be a little bit cynical here, is that the emperor has no clothes. These people don't have any money. They're stealing from trust funds because they can't pay their operating costs. So if I'm a legislator and I don't even, criminal legal reform isn't really my issue, and CDAA is opposing, I'm going to be like, well, they're not going to come after me. They don't have any money to attack me. So I also just want to flag that for any on the fence legislators out there. The emperor has no clothes.
Naked prosecutors running all around. Megan, I'm wondering if you could tell us what the reaction has been to your story. And I'm especially interested in reactions from CDAA members, or of course others, and what changes you expect to see as a result of this report.
Sure. So I think that the biggest upshot right now is that these smaller counties that were relying on what's called a circuit prosecutor to come in and take their cases, they don't have that anymore. So the counties that are affected, like I said, they're the smaller ones, don't have the resources. They've told me that they'll get by, they'll make do, but it's nice, it's helpful when somebody comes in and has all of the resources that you need, and you don't have to pay for it with governments who are already cash strapped. The other outcome that may come of this is when I emailed the Attorney General's office about it, they told me that they were looking into it. They had asked for and received the copy of the audit, and we'll know in the future what they decide to do. But one thing to note is that this audit was actually funded by the CDAA as well, so it wasn't necessarily an independent audit. So it'll be interesting to see if the AG's office or anybody else decides to take another crack at this and maybe expand it to see what other types of funds are being misused.
Really clear, the audit that revealed that $2.8 million earmarked for environmental causes had been misspent on other things was their own audit, and an external independent audit might be worse?
Yes. So it was an external audit. So they hired a firm to do it, but still that firm is reporting back to the CDAA.
Wow. All right. So Cristine, back to you. Are there legislative changes, appropriations changes, other changes that you think are necessary to prevent this from happening again?
Well, I definitely think we need an independent audit, either by the Attorney General or the state auditor, to understand beyond the environmental funds that were misappropriated, if there are other accounting irregularities or misspending of funds. Much of CDA's budget is taxpayer dollars, and I think that the state needs to take a close look and be sure that those are being spent appropriately. I know that they receive asset forfeiture funds and other allocations that probably need to be examined. I expect that legislators will be concerned and interested in this and looking into it during this legislative session. Happy to know that the Attorney General is taking a close look and may have some recommendations or improvements of his own, or perhaps the new Attorney General may have recommendations of his or her own. But there clearly needs to be more evaluation when we're talking about taxpayer dollars and public funds being misused.
Yeah, I think the reputational problem here, especially for a prosecutorial group, kind of can't be underscored enough. Kate, I'm wondering if you're going to expect changes. I'm wondering, especially if this is going to change how reform-minded prosecutors like George Gascon of George Gascon of Los Angeles or DA Chesa Boudin of San Francisco are going to interact with the CDAA, or if you think this is going to impact the CDAA's current membership. Are people going to jump off this ship?
I think that's a very interesting question. I mean, George Gascon is currently not a member of CDAA for very, very good reasons, I imagine. I don't imagine, for good reasons. Chesa Boudin is a member of the CDAA. There's another reform prosecutor, Diane Becton, that still remains a member of the CDAA. So I'm not, I can't speak for them. I don't know how that will impact their decision whether to stay or go or, fight for change from the inside. I think what this shows, as you said at the top of the hour or the top of the show, that, the CDAA has been fighting in court in LA, joining with these, unelected civil servants against George Gascon's policies. I think it gives, if not like legal ammunition, at least a messaging or communications sort of, and I'm trying to think of the right word, if not ammunition, but a defense or, something to point out that, these people, this organization, the CDAA, coming into court and making assertions about Gascon's policies from a great distance away. I mean, we've seen how the CDAA treats court decisions, giving them money. They've taken that and stolen the money. So I would certainly see that as something important to point out, that they shouldn't be taken seriously in court. They have no credibility. They've wasted that over years.
Megan, from a reporter's perspective, do you expect your story to give rise to more scrutiny from the media? I mean, I know the CDAA, before your article, it was like not a super sexy topic. Prosecutors lobbying organizations are not going to be the splashy, attention-grabbing, clickbaity headline usually. But now, this has exposed something pretty remarkable, and I'm wondering if you expect increased media attention based on this story.
I would hope so. I know for sure, the story from a metric standpoint did a lot better than my editors or I expected. So there's a lot of interest there. And I know for myself, I'm going to continue to follow where their money is going, if there's any sort of increased oversight on it. So I guess I think so. I think that there will be.
Law. On both sides of criminal law, defense side criminal law, prosecutor side criminal law. And I'm wondering if you could talk to us about if an ordinary person did this, right, took money that a judge had ordered them to use for a certain purpose and used it for another purpose, would a prosecutor member of the CDAA be able to charge that person with a crime?
It's unlikely that would be a new crime. For sure, a judge could pursue contempt proceedings or a recall of that settlement and the appropriation of it. What I do find challenging about the behavior of CDAA is that we, as prosecutors, prosecute businesses all the time, indeed some of them for environmental crimes, and require them to pay significant amounts of monies to compensate for the harm they've caused to the community. And we give them short timelines on which to make that payment. The uncovering through this audit of the $3 million that we know of over the past decade or so, CDAA has indicated will take a very long time to repay, and concerns me for the members who made those contributions and the effects that has for their jurisdiction and for the rural jurisdictions that benefit from the prosecutors that can be hired using those funds. It's a bit hypocritical to me that the timeline for CDAA to repay those funds is not held to the same standards that anybody else they might prosecute, where we would normally see a 3-year window in which to complete the payment of your fines and fees. They've given themselves a much longer runway.
All right, Kate, being similarly steeped, I would like to invite you to jump in on that last question, if you want to.
On the hypocrisy of putting burdens on the poor that they themselves cannot carry. Yeah, I can talk about that. I mean, these are the people that are prosecuting, as Cristine pointed out, a lot of poor people, a lot of small business owners for, let's say, they make accounting errors. Do we think that a district attorney would be so magnanimous to that person who came into court and said, oh, I just borrowed from Peter to pay, Paul here, and I thought that was good? That person would be prosecuted. That small business owner and the poor are regularly prosecuted for not paying their restitution, not paying their fines and fees, and they're not given, as Cristine just pointed out, those generous terms and conditions, and they're not told to investigate themselves. Hey, you go and you tell us what you did wrong, bring it back to us, and we'll let you figure out your punishment. That's what's happening here.
We're almost at time, but you've really driven home a point that I feel like we can't not talk about, which is that to an ordinary person who does not regularly experience the inanity of the prosecutorial world and like the criminal system on a daily basis, this whole thing seems like pants on head lunacy. And I'm wondering, Kate, do you think this is going to trickle down to voters who are considering, first of all, who they elect as their own prosecutor, and also ballot initiatives supported by the CDAA? Are ordinary voters is this going to sink in for them, or is it still too obscure?
Well, I think that that's sort of our job, in a way, to make it real and to make it to allow voters to make the connection between these powerful law enforcement forces and how they act and how it impacts their lives. And I think that's been done very effectively with police associations and with police officers and police departments to show that how the voters have been exposed to, and I think to their actions, and how much they've impacted our carceral system. And I think we need to make that point, not just in California, but nationwide. I mean, there are district attorneys associations in every state, and in whether it's in Albany or in Carson City, Nevada, or any number of state houses, these prosecutors associations are driving incarceration. They're driving state policy, which has led us to the situation we find ourselves in this country, where we have over 2 million people in cages. So I think it's on us to make the point to the voters that these people that you may not be aware of, you need to be aware of, and you need to hold them accountable at the ballot box.
Well, in light of taking on that burden, Megan, Kate, and Cristine, thank you so much for joining us here to unpack this for us, to talk about what it means. It's been such a pleasure having you, and I hope we'll have you back again soon.
Thanks so much.
So that's all the time we have for today. You heard it here. The CDAA is up to some wild stuff with their own money, and the scandals that have been turned up are only from their own investigation. So who knows what an external audit will reveal. You can keep an eye on it here, and you can catch all the latest news here. This is The Appeal Live. I'm Emily Galvin Almanza. You can follow The Appeal News on Facebook or The Appeal on Twitter for all of these juicy stories, and we look forward to having you back again soon.